Thank you for joining us and welcome. So this is our second Lunch and Learn. So today's topic of choice is reducing food waste. And because I'm not an expert in that, I brought in someone who is. So a quick little intro. Pittsburgh Fit, we try to do everything good for you and for the environment and the planet as well. So reducing food waste is good for the world. It helps you eat more, and it's all good things all around. It can help you cut costs. It can do a lot of good things for you. So if you haven't met Marissa is the awesome nutrition coach that we have at Pittsburgh Fit. Jody's our fearless leader, and Heather Bennick is our guest. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get this puppy started. All right. So our topic for today is reducing food waste. I promise you only have to listen to me talk for 2 more seconds. But our guest is Heather Bennick of Zero Waste Coaching. So she's working on decreasing the amount of waste people produce, working in a one-on-one or small group setting. And some cliff notes on Heather, right? She has done some work in New York with a friend of Jody's, and that's how we came across each other. A highlight for her, last year, her trash totaled 4.1 pounds for all of 2020. Yes, and that is less than I eat for lunch every single day. So it's even more impressive. So zero waste or low waste lifestyle just means having an intentional practice on reducing and diverting the things that you would normally throw away. So anything that we can do to improve our impact on the planet and improve our impact on our nutrition is going to be the way to go. So I'm going to hand things over to Marissa and Heather to take it away from here. If you have any questions, do me a favor and throw them in the chat, and I will make sure to pay attention to them, and then we will take care of everything at the very end. So remember, questions in the chat, we will answer them as we come to them, and I cannot wait to hear the rest of this presentation.
So reducing waste is so important, but it seems like there's a really big lack of education around it, which is kind of why we put this presentation together. And there's a lot of information that you kind of need to learn about and how to reduce waste, but we were able to kind of narrow down into just 3 separate categories. So the first category, we called it use it or lose it. And this has to do with fridge rotation, shopping, cleaning, and proper storage. The second thing we kind of came up with was creative reuse, which I really, really like this section of limiting food waste, which has to do with cook, chill, canning, and then recycling your food items. And then the third thing we have is composting and disposal, which this is where a lot of the education comes in, and this is where we're lacking in a lot of the education area. So you can compost animal-based products, plant-based products, processed foods, and then there's also Shadyside Worms. So we're going to go through these 3 things, and hopefully at the end you'll have a really good idea of how to limit your own food waste.
All right. It's so fun being here with you guys and getting to talk about one of the things that I think about all the time. Welcome to my brain. So we'll start with fridge rotation. This is really just a system for staying on top of what's in your pantry, your fridge, your cupboards, so that you're not letting things go bad and you're not wasting money, you're not wasting resources, you're not contributing to what's going in the compost or the trash, because we don't need to feed the landfills any more than we already are. There's one of these tools that I find useful is having an eat me first drawer, container, shelf, something that's like really visible. Mine is the top left-hand corner of my fridge is where I look for food that needs used first, or where I put food that needs used first. That's where I keep my leftovers, veggies that don't have so much life left in them, things like that. So I really, really encourage you to consider what makes the most sense for you in keeping track of the longevity of your food, and so that things don't get shoved in the back and die there by themselves. A useful thing to consider is we notice those dates on a lot of grocery store foods. And like, what do those mean? Primarily, the best buy, sell by, and use by dates are for grocery stores, and they don't impact us a lot as consumers. Best buy and sell by are essentially, that's kind of what the grocery stores need to pay attention to, of how long they can have it on their shelves. The one that we could pay more attention to is the use by. This is not a strict date, it's an estimate, but typically if something's past its use by date too much, then we may want to consider whether it's spoiled or not. And of course, our bodies are not garbage disposals, they are not trash cans. We don't want to be eating things that are not don't have nutritional value for us. So, while we can be more mindful about like what still has value, we don't need to treat our bodies like dumpsters and eat spoiled things.
So the next super important thing when it comes to eating what you buy is how you do your shopping. So planning out, if you know what you're going to eat or cook, and then you plan your grocery list around that, it's going to save you a ton of time, and it's going to save you a lot of waste. So if you ever find yourself just aimlessly walking around a grocery store, grabbing items, you don't really have a plan, you're buying things you probably don't need, you're overbuying, or you're buying things that you already have at home, which is going to lead to a lot of food waste. So just taking time to plan out what you want to eat this week or what you want to cook this week is really going to make it so every item that you end up buying is actually going to be a useful item, and it's not going to get thrown away, or you're not going to have too much of it that you can't eat it. So if you plan for the food you're buying, the likelihood of it getting eaten is much higher than if you just go to the grocery store and start picking out stuff that kind of looks good, but really don't know what you're going to do with it. And then another thing to really pay attention to before you go shopping is finding out what's in season versus what's out of season. So if you can, something as simple as just Googling, hey, what's in season this month, or what's not going to taste great this month, is a really good idea. Because I don't know how many times I have even gone to the grocery store and bought a piece of fruit that was out of season and it tasted awful. And then you don't really want to eat it. So what happens? You end up throwing it out or hopefully composting it. But regardless, it got wasted because you bought something that wasn't in season at the time. And in talking later, when we talk about creative reuse, there are ways to eat vegetables that are out of season during other seasons. But for the biggest part of grocery shopping, paying attention to what's in season is going to be really helpful, and it's going to just taste better altogether. And then the last thing that's really, really important when you're shopping is paying attention to where the food is in the store that you buy it. So if you get a piece of fruit that's stored just in the middle of the store, not in a refrigerator, not in the freezer, well, that means when you get home, you also want to store that food item outside of the fridge. A lot of people just automatically assume that every produce item needs to be thrown in the fridge, but that's actually, if it's not supposed to be stored that way, it's going to ripen, or it's going to end up not being as good. So really just taking time to pay attention to where you're grabbing your food from is going to be super, super crucial when it comes to being able to eat what you buy and it's still tasting good.
I think that's a really good point about noticing where you get things and storing them in the same place in your home. Thank you, Marissa. So we'll move on to cleaning here. This is, I'll be honest, I don't worry a ton about this, but I know that some people, it makes them feel a lot better to clean their produce. And also if I get something that's not organic, then I'm far more likely to clean my produce. You can use like a spritzer bottle with 4 parts water and 1 part vinegar. An optional choice is to add lemon juice. And then if you're spritzing like veggies or something in a colander in your sink or fruit, you simply spritz, let it sit for 5 minutes, and then you can rinse it off. If it's something that's like leafy, like lettuce or parsley or something, it could be more of a soak. And these are things that you can, take all your leafy greens through the same bath. So that is one way to, I suppose, take a little bit better care of yourself and put your mind at ease. When I'm grocery shopping and I use, and I'm getting produce, I don't use bags unless I bring my own. Like you can just stick apples like directly in your bin, or let's see, it's not called a bin. What's that called? A shopping cart or a basket. And if you're concerned about like who's touching what, then just wash it at home or have your own produce bags.
And then the final thing is proper storage. So when you go to store any of your food items, if you put them in a container that you can't see what's in it, you can't see how much is left, or just you have no idea what the container is even doing in with the food, you're probably not going to eat it. It's probably going to go bad, or back to the shopping, you're going to buy it again and then end up overbuying. So storing food in containers that are going to be clear so you can see exactly what you have in that container is going to be super important, which also kind of goes back to the shopping and planning and knowing what you have in your refrigerator. So, and then another thing is how you store certain items. So certain fruits are going to give off an ethylene gas, which is going to cause some things to ripen quicker than others. So when you're doing your fridge rotation, for example, feeling and looking at your fruits and vegetables, and if you notice like one vegetable on one side is starting to ripen really fast and it's next to an apple, we'll move those two things apart and just kind of separate them, because there's a reason that just the one side of the vegetable is starting to go bad and the other's not. So really paying attention to where you're storing things and what you're storing them in is important. And then another thing is when you go to store something, pay attention that you're closing it properly or putting the lid on right. And something as simple as closing potato chips. If you don't close them right, they're going to go stale much faster. You're not going to eat them. You're going to throw them away. So just being slightly more patient when you're putting something away and making sure it's done right is also a big thing that's going to reduce waste and allow it to stay good longer, really.
I'd like to invite everybody to consider the slide and think of one thing that you heard today or you see from this that you would be applicable at home, and type it into the chat. And if you're watching this as a recording, I still encourage you to write it down, because this is how we retain information and utilize what we're learning in life. I'm going to do that too. I really like Marissa's tip about clear storage containers.
I'm totally a bottom to top fridge rotation guy, for sure. Definitely bottom to top.
Don't come mess up my fridge, Anthony.
I may. I like the idea about the bags to the store. Now, Heather, do you have any recommendations on what types of produce bags you bring if you're bringing something with you?
I highly recommend natural fibers, so like cotton, because the synthetic ones give off microplastics, and then we end up eating those too, or they end up in the water stream when we're washing our clothing, or etc., whatever else we're washing. So there's lots and lots of options that you can buy for produce bags, or you can even make them out of old sheets or pillowcases or fabric that grandma gave you.
Just make sure you wash it once or twice before then.
Especially.
All right, so let's move on to our next topic. So we're going to talk about creative reuse of foods.
So this is actually a really fun topic. There's multiple ways to do creative reuse, and if you ever can't think of anything, you can go to Google and they'll give you a million. But so the first one is just cooking the item. So adding heat and then eating it. And if you're going to cook for creative reuse, you're going to have to eat the item a little sooner than you would the rest of ours. So you're going to want to use this type of reuse when you plan on eating it within the next weekish. So with cooking, you can use stems, skins, rinds, and you can turn it into soups, stocks, stir fries, chips, just dehydrate the product, put it in a drink. Literally almost every part of a fruit or vegetable can be cooked. So if you just, any type of scrap, for the most part, you can throw into another type of food, especially a stir fry. Some of the stuff I throw in stir fries, I like the stems of broccoli even. They taste really good, and instead of throwing it out, you can just put it in there, and even if you're having company over, most of the time, nobody will even know it's the stem. They'll just think it's another vegetable. So it's kind of crazy how much we really can use every part of a fruit or vegetable, but we don't. But hopefully now that we're talking about it, you will. But it's cooking is also a great option for overripe produce, because the flavor is still going to be there. And by cooking it, you're going to change that texture that you kind of get from an overripe fruit or vegetable. So that's a really good plan for that kind of stuff. And then another really good way to keep food longer is to chill. So chilling food to at least 0 degrees and then storing them. So this type of reuse is going to allow you to keep the product much longer than just by cooking it. And most fruits and vegetables do freeze well. There are some, such as celery, lettuce, cabbage, cucumbers, that aren't going to freeze as well because they're mostly water. So when you do go to thaw them, they're going to be a little wilted and mushy. And there's also some fruits that aren't going to freeze as well. So like apples, grapefruits, lemons, watermelons. But Fruits, if you don't plan on thawing them and you just throw them in a smoothie, then it doesn't really matter if they freeze well or not, because they're going to end up tasting good if you just blend them up. So really and truly, most things can be frozen, but when it does come to chilling vegetables, you want to blanch them first. So what blanching is putting the vegetables in boiling water or steam for a short period of time. And the reason you must do this is to stop enzymatic actions, which is what causes the loss of flavor, color, and texture. And also the blanching kind of cleans the surfaces off of dirt and organisms, and then brightens the color and also reduces the loss of vitamins in those vegetables as well. So those are two really common ways to keep things longer.
Awesome. And so if you're not going to freeze something or eat it right away, another option, as Marissa mentioned earlier, this is good for preserving food to eat out of season, would be canning or pickling. One of my favorite things to do with pickling is pickling stems, like colored Swiss chard, kale. I've done parsley, like cilantro, and I really like pickly things because it is a low waste way and plastic free way to have something savory, like as a snack or on my salad. So I'm super pro pickling. Canning is also a super option, and it doesn't need to be as, I think that there's an idea that canning is like a big orchestration and you have to have a pressure cooker, and pressure cookers can be kind of dangerous and like it's this whole big deal. It doesn't need to be. I think we can use Instapots to can. I'm not sure about that, but Anthony says we can. But you can also, it is as simple as like cleaning a jar, like it will be sanitized, and the lids, sanitizing it either in the dishwasher or in boiling water. You use your tongs to get it out. You have your food that you've already, like, let's say we're making applesauce or pear sauce or dilly beans, which are dill beans, pickle. Like, oh my gosh, my family never made them growing up, and my friend always did. And I was like, why don't we make dilly beans? They're so good. And so you have your food that's already hot, and, you know, maybe it's tomato sauce. And I got distracted by Anthony's note to self of dilly beans. And so your food's hot, your jar is hot, you put it in, you clean off the top and seal it. And throughout the day, you'll hear a little like plunk, plunk, or like a pop. Maybe other people have better like noises for the sound of a lid sealing. And once it's sealed, then you're good to go, and it can store indefinitely. And that doesn't, if it seals, it doesn't need to be kept in the fridge. It's super fun. And then it's so rewarding to, during like off seasons, get to eat out of season produce. You can also can things like beans or meats. I'm thinking along the lines, yeah. I haven't done that, but it doesn't mean you can't. So we're talking about food, and along with food use, and particularly from grocery stores, many of us end up with a lot of recycling. Now, recycling can be a great system when it is used properly. It is a great system, but there's a really unfortunate stat here. So brace yourselves. In Pittsburgh, 17 to 18% of what goes in those blue bins is actually recycled. That means that more than 80% of what we put in the recycling goes to the landfill. This is primarily due to contamination. Contamination is something like grease on pizza boxes or grease on anything. It's peanut butter jars or containers that were not washed out. It's food, it's items going in there that are not recyclable within the city. And Pittsburgh is like fairly limited with what is accepted within the blue bins. But by adhering to what is within the blue bin, like regulation, it increases what we're able to recycle. So I really, really encourage you to check in on this. I'm going to share a few more like key points with that, but these two links are super, super helpful for knowing how we can be effective recyclers instead of wish cyclers. Wish cycling is when you recycle something just because you wish it was recyclable, and that's really just contributing to the contamination and ultimately sending more to the landfill. So as we're preparing to recycle things, sorry, I notice I'm talking very fast because this is something that like I get really frustrated about. And when I walk by like blue bins on the sidewalk and I see like to-go containers in there, it like I try and like be a good neighbor and not like get angry at my neighbors, but it is not recyclable within the city of Pittsburgh, and it's contaminating and making more go to the landfill. So we want to make sure everything is clean and dry. This includes papers. If it is raining, you need to cover your bin. Otherwise, it is like considered contamination. For the city of Pittsburgh, plastic things that are recyclable are bottles and jugs without the lid that are under 3 gallons. This means that tubs, like yogurt tubs, are not recyclable. Lettuce comes in like these big packs. They are not recyclable. Clamshells that berries or tomatoes might come in, those are not recyclable. Only jugs and bottles without the lid and clean. Same goes for glass. And with aluminum, that's a far easier one to recycle, but you need to bear in mind with all of these things that it must be larger than the size of your fist, because otherwise it gets stuck in the equipment and it slows the process down and creates problems. So that means that when we're using aluminum cans and we're taking the lid off, that leave part of it attached so you can press it back in. Otherwise, the lid, if you remove it entirely, is not recyclable. I already mentioned with pizza boxes, you can remove the top. It's typically not greasy, and you can recycle the top. However, the bottom is greasy. That's going to contaminate. That is something that could be composted or used for like a fire when you go camping or something like that, or put in the trash. It is unfortunate to throw things away. I, of all people, hate doing that. And it is better to throw something away than to recycle something that is not recyclable. This first link is recycling guidelines. The second link is Recycle This Pittsburgh. It is super, super helpful. I have learned so much from this site. It goes item by item what is and is not recyclable, from like masks to like those those papery takeout food containers. They're not recyclable. They're not compostable because they have a thin plastic lining on the inside. So those have to be thrown away. And you can also ask places to plate for here and then put it in your own container or use your own container. I have found that if you ask in a way that elicits the response that you want, people are far more willing to support you than if you say like, I don't want disposable containers. Instead, ask in a way that elicits what you want. Okay. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, I wanted to ask a question here. What is something from this slide that you would like to apply in your daily life, or that you learned, or what's your take home from this slide?
I already threw in the chat that the dilly beans sounds silly and fun, and I kind of want to try it.
You mean amazing and delicious, I'm sure.
Amazing and delicious, yes.
I really liked Marissa's comment of adding stems to stir fries.
Yeah, with cilantro, you're supposed to chop up the stems and just use it with the regular cilantro. I never have any left over.
Yeah, I find that the links too that you posted in here are something that everyone should absolutely read through, because I think you would be shocked. Like, you would be shocked. I know I was, to find out what all the recycling rules actually are. Because I think we all assume we're doing it right because we've never been told differently. So highly, highly recommend everyone taking like 5 to 10 minutes and reading through those sites.
Absolutely.
Super awesome. And
compressed paper, like Tetra Paks from milk or something, are not recyclable. They're mixed paper. They have plastic.
Yeah, and they were sold initially as super recyclable materials, those Tetra Paks. Why they like pushed that right at the very beginning. They're like environmentally friendly packaging because it's not plastic.
That's called greenwashing.
Greenwashing, that's a crime. Should
and
be.
Dishonesty to make something more environmentally friendly than it is.
Well, we have this short list of some quick reuse ideas. Marissa, Heather, you guys want to take one or two and run through them? Because I think some of these are really good, especially the coffee pancakes. That's what I want to know more about.
They're so good. Eat them. Oh my gosh. One of my favorites is definitely the coffee pancake. And and also making like chips at home, which would be zero waste, one of my faves, from like anything that you're peeling, potatoes, squash, carrots. So good.
So I am a big fan again of the coffee beans. I just love coffee flavor. So even I'll make like a vanilla protein smoothie and throw the coffee grounds in there. You can literally put them in anything sweet and they taste amazing. And another thing, like we said, the stems and the like tops of peppers, people just are so quick to throw them away, but they actually taste good, especially when they're cooked. So using those little pieces that you don't normally use are really good ways for creative reuse, and they're really easy and taste good still.
Yeah, and I just made some squash soup, and I peel the squash and you take the seeds out, and we use some peppers and some onions, and there are all these ends, and actually we eat a lot of eggs too. So I threw all of that in a bag and put it in the fridge, and then actually yesterday I put it in some water and I just boiled it and then put it on simmer for 2 hours, and it's a nice, pretty, savory stock. Then I took all that stuff out, went in my backyard, dug a hole, and put all my waste down there. So thank you guys.
Until today.
We're getting there. And then my dogs could smell the waste buried in the dirt, and they were like, what is all this delicious smelling stuff?
Yeah.
Different problems. But I love the squash or pumpkin guts in soups and hummus. Hummus is a super easy one to do, and you can do it with any kind of bean, really. It's just the tahini flavor. But you can put anything in an immersion blender. You can put anything in a regular blender. And then yeah, it just tastes delicious. Now, I'm definitely going to make those coffee pancakes, but I have to make sure I can't have a cup of coffee that day because there's still caffeine in those grounds.
So the next thing is composting and disposal, which again, I know I mentioned in the beginning, but I feel like this is a topic that a lot of people also don't know a ton about. So when you're composting animal-based products, unless your system is specifically set up to handle animal or dairy products, you're probably going to run into some issues because between animals and the smell, it may not end well. And that doesn't mean you can't compost it. You just want to set your system up correctly so you're not going to run into any of those problems. But even so, if you find that it's hard to compost that stuff, go back to the creative reuse slide. You can literally use almost all those products in some kind of bone broth and soups or anything like that, really. And even which was on the other side too, turning eggshells into chalk. Like most things can be turned into something else, even if they can't be composted. So if you have a system that will allow for animal products to be composted, that's fantastic. But if not, there's other uses for them. They don't need to just be thrown away. But going back to our last presentation, a little bit, maybe trying to eat a little bit more plant-based and a little bit less meat anyway would kind of help with the composting stuff. And it's just a better way to eat. Just got to throw some nutrition tips in there as well. So increasing your veggies, they're going to compost better, and it's going to be better for the environment as well.
We always need more nutrition tips. There's a lot to sort through out there. So we'll move on to plant-based. So this is, it's basically considering when we're thinking of like any composting system, we can think of brown versus green material, and you need a balance of both. So brown would be things like dead leaves, twigs, dried things like, I'm looking at my mother's garden, corn husks would count as something that's brown. Also things like paper. I try not to put bleached items in my compost, but non-bleached things, like once in a while I'll have a brown paper bag that I'll put in there, and I'm typically shredding that first. Some like napkins, paper products can be composted, and it just kind of depends on your system, but those are things that are considered brown. And then when we oh my goodness, when we think of green things, it would be your compost from inside. It's lawn clippings. It's things that still have like the juice and life in them like that. Also, you can compost pet hair or human hair or nail clippings or floor sweepings unless you have a synthetic carpet. Like composting is a really good solution for getting a lot of things out of the landfill stream and returning value to the ecosystem around you. And part of the reason that we want to keep organic material out of the landfill is that organic material, such as, Christmas trees, food scraps, half the birthday cake, whatever, it's organic material that is creating methane in the landfill. There's not enough air, oxygen, microbes within the landfill to have these things decompose or rot. So even apple cores are preserving for years and years and years in landfills because it's just a compressed system. But it's creating methane, which contributes to greenhouse gases, which is global warming. So diverting as much as we can and utilizing composting in that way is a way to be an eco-warrior and care for yourself and other generations. You're muted, Marissa. Wouldn't be a Zoom call without that.
I know. I knew I was going to do that one of these times. So processed foods can absolutely be composted, and we would much rather them be composted than be thrown away. However, just as they're not healthy and great for us to eat, they also come in packages that typically can't be recycled and have to be thrown away and end up in landfills. So just for our own health and for the earth, staying away from processed foods is really something we should all be trying to do anyway. But again, just because they're not super nutrient dense does not mean you should not compost them, because you absolutely should. It's still better to compost them than just throw them out and them end up in a landfill. So regardless, if it's food, it can be composted, and it really should be composted.
All right, now this is my turn to talk. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Shadyside Worms. So they're a local Pittsburgh company, which is pretty cool. And what they are is a curbside compost exchange. So what happens is you pay for basically pickup. So every week, they'll give you a bucket, a 3.5 or a 5 gallon bucket. So you can put all of your compostable materials in that bucket. So you don't have to worry about composting. All you have to do is put your stuff in the bucket. Then at the end of the week, you put your bucket out onto the curb, and somebody from Shadyside Worms will drive around and pick it up. Now, what they do is they put a liner in the bucket that's compostable. So they'll take the bag and then they'll put a new liner in it. Now, what do you get from it? Because it's an exchange, right? So at the beginning and end of the season, they have a shares system. So if you get picked up for the entire year, then in the spring, starting before spring or at the end of summer, at the end of their composting cycle, they will give you a 20-pound bag of highly nutrient-dense soil. So that's what you get in exchange. So number one, they pick it up, take the waste away so you don't have to have worms in your house. We'll come back to that in a second. And the other is you get this highly, perfectly composted soil. So these guys specialize in the actual worms. So their worms are specific and they're very effective at what they do. So you can check out more about them at shadysideworms.com, but they're pretty cool. You can pay for a year in full. You can get a 3-gallon bucket or a 5-gallon bucket, but it's just like a CSA. You pay into it at the beginning. They use that to grow their product, and they use their specific worms and techniques to make this super, super nutrient dense soil. Then you get it, you put it in your garden, you plant, and then all of your organic matter from then on out grows in your own yard.
I saw one of the Shadyside people doing a pickup near my house. I was walking my dog, and I don't really consider myself like a groupie very often, but I saw them and I was like, "Hi, thanks for what you do." And they looked so startled, but then they like smiled after they realized I wasn't like attacking them or anything. But so I felt a little bit bad.
Yes. Now, the reason that I mentioned Shadyside Worms was an idea that came from Heather. So Heather, can you tell me about your composting situation?
So you guys, you can compost in your home and it's not smelly. It's called vermicomposting or worm bins. And it's simply, you have some worms, you have some soil, you can get a starter kit, you can make it yourself. And you can put your food scraps right into the bin. And I simply like chop my food up into like little tiny pieces when I use scissors actually. I use scissors and cut it into the bin. and mix it in with like the brown material, like brown paper bags and things like that. And then they like go to town, and the worms will like grow to fit the container. So you won't like get too many worms for your container. And if they're not quite like eating the food fast enough and you need more worms, then you need to upsize your container. It is so fun. It is easier to take care of my worms than my houseplants. That probably reflects more on me than anything else. But it's like, I highly recommend, if you do not have access to outdoor composting, if you cannot be clever and dig holes, you cannot have your own composting system outside, or you don't want to pay for it, please check out vermicomposting or worm bins. If you want to message me, I'll talk about worm bins all day long with you.
Yeah, no, it's something to note, right? If you end up putting meat scraps or animal-based products in there, it's not going to work out for you. Also, if you're going to end up putting in too much food scrap, that's what tends to smell, because the food is going bad before the worms can compost it. So it's an important thing to know that the amount of food that you're disposing has to balance out with the size of your composting bin. Now, does your bin even have a lid?
Yeah, it has a lid with air holes, and then
Yep.
around the top it has air holes too for flow and ventilation. And with like most systems, including this one, you just want to like kind of toss it sometimes to get some aeration so they can move around and it doesn't just like settle.
Yeah, and I have seen some startup companies on Kickstarter where it's almost like a pull-out trash can that's about waist height. So you put your waste in, and it has like a little hand crank almost, and you can rotate the dirt. So you put your waste in, and then every time you put your waste in, you give it 1 or 2 rotations. It has a lid. They're like pretty clean and tidy, but it can be as simple as reusing a cat litter box with a lid, or as complex as, building a 3-tiered system that's wrapped in plastic with holes poked in it. But simple first steps, things that take you 5 minutes or less, are going to be the most optimal way to start. So Mandy said in her comments that she wants to print out a list and put it next to her garbage can, right? That's perfect. That's a first step, because then it just gives you a 1-second task. And then as you get better and better at that kind of thing, we can make it more and more complex. But start simple, start today, and then we'll move on. So Heather, when do I throw something away?
I would use throwing things away as a last resort when you're not able to figure out anything else to do with it. If it can't be composted, and we've talked about like a lot of things can be composted. So like these are things to like check your biases with, like wrinkly potatoes. How can you use that? Wrinkly carrots, they can be rehydrated in water. Hair, we already talked about this. This can be composted. And then also there's like all these creative recycling programs, like for bottle caps, which you cannot put in the curbside bin in Pittsburgh, soft plastic. So this is a really valuable way to do a little bit of homework. If you need help with that, let me know. But throwing things away, I would say, is a last resort, because those landfills aren't going anywhere, and we know that they have a lot of problems.
And as Heather mentioned too, if you don't know if something can be composted, do some homework and figure it out first before you just start throwing things into a hole. So really make sure you're educated on the things that you're putting in there, so you're not littering ultimately, which is the exact opposite of what we want to be doing.
Right. Now, some of the garbage or trash disposal places around the country have, instead of a landfill, they have an incinerator. Now, an incinerator is basically a humongous, super hot bonfire. So some of these places will take all of the garbage, they'll put it in a pile, and they'll slowly push it into this incinerator system. Now, there's some benefits and some drawbacks to an incinerator. So one of the drawbacks is you're destroying material that can never make it back into circulation for the most part. So you're destroying it, it's gone, that's it. So this creating trash is bad, but recycling is the best option, but you can't always do that. So in these incinerators, a couple things happen. One, the temperature of the fire gets so hot, they can actually generate energy. So I believe there's an incinerator closer to where I'm from, near Philadelphia, and they actually can run most of their town's electricity through this incinerator. So if they needed to, that'd be good for Texas, because they can keep things nice and warm and toasty. Now, on top of those, right, there's a lot of gases, and those gases are full of particulates. Now they spend millions of dollars on these filtration systems because the filtration system can catch particles that can be sorted and reused later, but it's not perfect. So you're filling the air with particulates that do get through these filtration systems. Some of it can be captured and reused, some of it can't. But at the end of the day, it's all gone. All of the garbage is gone. Again, I can't stress it enough. It's gone does not actually mean gone on the planet. It means it's somewhere else in a different form. So if we're burning microplastics that can't be caught in the filtration systems, it's going to get into the air. So the question is, what is better? What's worse than a landfill? Landfills are bad, but there are other ways to handle it. So it's just something to look at depending on where you specifically live.
Considering reducing there is an optimal choice. And with all of these things, like, it's finding what's sustainable for you and starting with what is attainable. Because if you try and make all these changes at once, then it's not going to stick, and it's ultimately less useful for you and less useful for those around you in the environment. So starting small and building up with what's attainable and sustainable is the way that any habit is built. So I would like to invite everyone for one last time to type it in the chat. What is either something that stood out to you, or what is a food that you're trying to think of what you need to do with it now, or like a creative way to reuse it or compost it, or, you know, maybe you're going to make stem stir fry next. So I invite you, whether you're watching this later or now, to go ahead and share it with us. I'm going to make coffee pancakes again. Also, this guy, Max Lamana, is where I learned this coffee pancake recipe, and the composting guys and Max are the people in the world that I want to be groupies for. He makes like banana peel, it's not, what's the meat that's like thin little strips in a burger? Roast beef out of banana peels. It's, or like in stir fries, or I saw him put it in a stew. I would use organic for that, but like, it is so creative, and everything he makes just looks fantastic, and I really enjoy the recipes. Check him out.
Banana peel roast beef. Now I'm intrigued.
Yeah, right. Heather, I see Jody just asked a question about the coffee grounds, which I'm actually super curious too. So can they go in the worm bucket, and does it, can you keep the worm bucket outside, or does it have to stay inside? Or
I think the worms go more dormant when they're outside. Maybe it'd be okay in like a garage or something. I keep mine in my basement. I haven't had any problems with that, and worms love coffee grounds. It helps balance the acidicness of the composting system. It's a good question.
All right, cool. So let's go through our use it or lose it, creative reuse, and compost. So we have a couple questions in here as we go through. So let me start from the very top. I'm gonna go through some of our notes. Our bodies are not trash cans. Favorite quote of the day. And Doritos definitely qualify as trash. Yes, I'm gonna answer that one without too much more thought. So let's see.
Really emotional.
I'm coming at some people right now, and that's totally fine. Now, first question. Man, people are really engaged. I like it a lot in the chat.
I see Amanda's question about food question, fatty pieces removed from raw meat. Mm-hmm. Something that, so I eat plant-based, so this is proxy knowledge, just to fess up. But something that I've seen people do is store, like in their freezer, have like a little baggie for like meat, fat meat. And then once it's full, you can use one of those mesh bags that like oranges or something could come in, and stick those out for the birds. You just want to stick it high enough that something isn't going to get to it. And that's like, the birds love it.
Yeah, I never thought birds would be interested in some fatty meat, but it's still nutrient dense at some point.
And they're living a very different lifestyle and diet.
The birds? Yeah. Yes. Perfect. Oh, go ahead, Marissa, take it away.
do have a question. So about like animal bones, I know you can do like bone broth and stuff, but they don't actually totally disappear or anything. So what do you do with those at that point?
I know that you can dry them and crush them.
That's what I was thinking. Like you just like crush them into like a little sandy thing and kind of cut them up-ish.
Yeah.
Those are something that would probably end up in the garbage.
Okay.
Yes, Heather, you should do a TED Talk from Pittsburgh about recycling. That is true. I agree.
Okay.
I agree. Yeah, the 19% is a little bit, or 18% is a little bit staggering of some information to take away.
And the national average is 34%. So this is somewhere that Pittsburgh is bombing. Like, it is sad. The thing is, though, Pittsburgh has an initiative that seems very unlikely to meet, but to be zero waste by 2050. So it is a city that tries and cares, or at least there are some people in the city that try and care. So that makes me feel hopeful. Like, it's not great right now, but people care and people want to make it better. And PCR, what does that stand for? It's a Pittsburgh group, but they do. Does anybody remember what that's called?
Is it Pittsburgh Creative Reuse?
No, but they offer like lessons or classes in creating worm composting bins and like hard to recycle systems like tires and things like that. They are a really cool organization in Pittsburgh that can help you out with reducing waste, finding ways to reuse things, lots of environmental education.
So if somebody wanted to learn more about limiting their food waste, what I'm going to do is point you to Heather specifically, and we'll send out some more information about this. But Heather is now a zero waste living coach, and she has a free 3-day challenge starting on March 3rd. So 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So you can go to heatherbennick.com/3-day challenge, and all this information will go out into our newsletter as well. So we'll spread the news as quick as we can. Now, if you have questions about nutrition, what we'd like you to do is go to pittsburghfit.com/nutrition, and you can book a free intro with Marissa, and we'll talk about, we'll do an in-body scan, we'll focus on your body composition, and it's important to understand the balance between what you need and what you don't, and how your body can live optimally without creating as little waste as possible. So I just want to say thank you everybody for attending our presentation, and we cannot wait to do more of these, and I'm sure I'm going to convince Heather to come into the gym and work out someday, so we'll have plenty of time to chat. So if you have any questions for Heather, follow her on Instagram at heather.do at Instagram, or follow us on Instagram at Pittsburgh Fit. Thanks guys. Thank you Heather. Thank you Marissa.
Thank you everyone. This was great talking with you.
Yes, have a great rest of your day. Happy Tuesday.